So let me tell you a story. So according to the Bible, in Genesis chapter 2, which is written first before Genesis chapter 1, we have the story of Adam and Eve. And in this story of Adam and Eve, first Adam is told by God that he can eat from any tree in the garden except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that in the day that he eats from the tree, he will certainly die. Now, as the story goes, Adam couldn't find a helpmeet. So this God says, hey, you know what? What we're going to do is we're going to take a little piece of rib from you and we're going to make a whole nother species, well, not a species, we're going to make a woman. You're going to like her. She's going to have tatas and boom boom and a boom boom. You're really going to like all those aspects. So he puts him to sleep. They make Eve. Now, nowhere in the Bible does it describe Adam telling Eve about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, nor does the Bible describe this God figure telling Eve about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The assumption that is made by most is the fact that Eve was most likely told by Adam. But somewhere within the story, there's a problem. The telling, I should say, there's a problem. Because when Eve is then confronted by the serpent, she tells the serpent that we can't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Least we touch it, we will surely die. Did you catch that? So when this God supposedly told Adam, hey man, if you eat from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, you're going to die. But either Adam or God or Eve just got her own ideas. And when she's telling the story to the serpent about the tree, she says, even if we touch it. Now, that was never a part of the deal. This God didn't tell this Adam that if he touched the fruit, he would die. But Eve kind of added that on, a little extra, that she added on to the story. So my statement rather, it's not a question, is that we got this God telling Adam supposedly or most likely telling Eve about the effects of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So from the source to the third person to the fourth person, there's a change. There's additions added to it. It makes you wonder or consider that since the biblical narratives are so backdated, for instance, we know that according to the Meneptah Stele that there were Israelites in and around the time frame of 1200. They might have been around sooner than that. Well, they would have to have been around a little earlier than that as nomadic people in the hillside area of the Levant. So they might have been around since the 1300s BCE. But we know that in 1204 BCE, Meneptah came in and kicked their butt. Now, the Genesis stories, especially chapter 2, is written by most archaeologists believe that it was written around 800 to 700 BCE. So that's at minimum of 400 years of storytelling. At minimum, maybe even 500 to 600 years of storytelling, verbal, by mouth, or even if it was written down in cuneiform or Proto-Canaanite languages or Proto-Hebrew languages, we have 5 years of the story being told. 500 years of the story being told, 400 to 500 years of the story being told. And then we know that Genesis chapter 1 wasn't written until around about the 600s BCE. So if it wasn't written down for 400 or 500 years, how much change could have occurred? How much change would have occurred? We just know that sitting in a classroom and doing a telephone game when I was in the 9th grade, whatever the teacher told the first student was completely different from the 32nd student that then relayed the message back to the teacher. That's just in a classroom in a 5-minute time frame. We're talking 400 to 500 years of retelling of a story. So when Christians, Bible believers like to say that, oh, the Ethiopian is the most original, or the writings that we have, the Vulgate or the Septuagint, are the most original. They are what you may have as the oldest. But as far as the originals, you would have no idea what the original would be. You understand what I'm saying? You have P69, P52. These are scraps, fragments of biblical literature, just little scraps, yay big, you know. You have no idea what the totality of whatever that page or scroll actually was. You assume that it fits into the Vulgate, or fits into the Septuagint. You make those assumptions. We don't have the Marcion Bible, so we don't know what Marcion wrote. We don't have his information. We only have what his people said who spoke against him said. We don't have what Valentinus wrote. We don't have anything from anybody in completeness from the first century, second century. We have none of that. Yet people are betting their life and living their life on the belief of a God whose original statements were changed within two people. And if this story was true, if it was true, you mean to tell me that 500 years of storytelling, it didn't change? That after the 500 years of storytelling, we got a whole nother 800 plus years of still storytelling. And then you got a new dude who walk onto the scene like he got some walk around money named Jesus, Yeshua. And then he's telling the story, walking around. Nobody tells his story. Yeshua doesn't write anything down. None of his apostles write anything down. The gospels were all written anonymously. And then you got this Paul, who is a Roman co-conspirator of the creation of Christianity. We got this agent in Paul who's writing these letters to these churches. And this is being done, they try to say around 50, but we actually don't know if it was in 50 or 60 or 70 or 80. It's most likely much, much later, after the fall of the temple in 70. So we got all this stuff that's nobody wrote down during the time frame that Joshua was walking around with some walk around money. And then then people believe that what all these different people, all these different writers, all these different variations of Christianity harmonized 300 years later into the Council of Nicaea, and then into the canonization of the Bible. It all just harmonized. And now you have it. You have your Bible, and it's went through the Vulgates, and it's went through Tinsdale and Geneva, and it's went through different Catholic doctrines and changes over the centuries. Before Martin Luther ever spoke a word, before John Calvin ever spoke a word, it went through changes, and then King James and changes, and then NIVs and changes, ESVs and changes, and all the way up to today and changes and changes. And to be a Christian is someone who truly have remarkable faith, because you have to have remarkable faith in man to be able to be a Bible believer. And that is the truth. You are believing in man, not your God. Because if it was your God, there would have been one word, one book, unchangeable, one doctrine, never a deviation. It would be only one truth. But yet, you have 42,000 denominations. Think about that. And it's all based on words of mouth. So y'all have a great day. And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.